your exit isn't over until you're fully engaged in whatever comes next. Think about that, Jared. And whether or not your business owner's selling, and that's what this was kind of tied to, or you're just somebody who's retiring, either way, the concept is that you're not fully retired until you're engaged in whatever's next. You're not fully done with this transition out of a business until you're fully into whatever's next. And I don't want people to hear like there always needs to be something because I need more money, because I need more whatever. But there has to be creation. And I think that's the key.
That was Ben Taatjes talking about the art of creation and how retirees or transitioning business owners always need to have the next thing. Hey everybody, Jared Sebesta here, co-host of Retire Repurposed. On behalf of Ben Taatjes and myself, thank you so much for joining us here today. Well, the world will tell you that when you retire, you are done creating. It's now a time to live the life, live the dream of leisure. And the more of nothing you do, the more you're winning in retirement. The truth is, this concept is unbiblical and foundationally untrue. In this podcast, Ben Taatjes will talk about how it's our duty and privilege to utilize our time, talent, and treasure to continue to create, and he will explain the difference between chasing the, quote, next thing and biblical contentment. Enjoy this episode. All right, folks, welcome back to the show. We're so glad that you're joining us here on Retire Repurposed. We have a fabulous show on tap for you today. We're going to talk about the art of creation. This is going to be a little bit of a different message than you've heard in the past, but we've got some really interesting topics and talking points to walk you through today on the show. Just a reminder, we have really dug deep on this idea of mindset over the past couple of shows. 3 episodes ago, Ben and I talked about the dangers of gap versus gain thinking. There's a great book out there by Dr. Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan called The Gap and the Gain. This is really about always comparing yourself to ideals versus looking in reverse and saying, how far have I come in the last month, 6 months, years? How much have I evolved? And Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy talk about how entrepreneurs and high achievers typically always don't give themselves enough credit. And that's called gap thinking. And so we talked about the importance of gain thinking, not only for entrepreneurs, but really retirees and pre-retirees in general. Then we talked about how gain thinking and gratitude intersect. And last week we talked about the power of your words and your voice. Ben Taatjes joins me on the show now. And Ben, this came from basically a client story of yours, a conversation you had with a client where this lady basically never used her voice throughout the entire day and kind of how that made her feel and why your voice is so important for the life of a retiree.
Yeah, we tied into isolation, but it was deeper than that. It was deeper than just being isolated. It was how important it is to speak, and it was just, my mind was blown when she shared that with me. She said, when I realized the next day why I felt so off, it was really clear. I never actually said a word. I never actually opened my mouth to speak, and I would like to. Think back to a day that you've spoken very little, maybe, and maybe you've never not spoken at all, but maybe there was that day where you were just, you didn't use your voice at all, and how you felt, and I think just realize how important your voice is.
We had a number of points that we talked through, but one of those is that your voice creates value. It can build others up. And this whole idea of creating, that's going to be a great segue because we're going to talk about that here today. But if you missed that episode, if you missed the other episodes where we talked about the gap and the gain, go back, listen to those shows. If you're on iTunes, if you're on Spotify and you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. By the way, if you just leave us a quick positive rating or review, that really helps us out, kind of spread the word on this idea of retiring with purpose. So today, Ben, we're going to talk about the art of creation. And this is really something that's been on our hearts. We're both reading a number of books, and they talk about this whole idea. We're entering, as of the recording of this podcast, the end of a year. So I think kind of, growth, development, that's kind of on everybody's radar as we approach the beginning of a new year. But let's just kind of start off by talking about this whole idea of creation and why this is so important.
Yeah, Jared, I think it's important, and I think about it a lot because it's kind of the antithesis of what many people think of when they think of retirees, right? And every time you're reading something, and the same thing with me is like I'm trying to apply it to, yes, myself for personal growth, but also to retirees. It's like, what exactly and how does this apply to, one of my clients, one of the people I talk to? And I think about many people, whether they were business owners or they were people who worked a 9-to-5 job, not a full, they just did work. Almost every time they were utilizing creation, which added value. Mm-hmm. And I think about the ultimate creator, and I go back to the story, right, in Genesis, where God created the heaven and earth. And I think how we're created in God's image. Mm-hmm. So it's natural. It's completely natural for us to look and be our best when we're creating.
Yeah, I think so. And I would say I feel that. I notice that. You always say, Ben, what's your best days at work? Probably wasn't payday. If I were to answer that question, my best days at work, whether I'm at work physically or at home, it was when I was creating. To me, rest days are fun, but the days that mean the most to me are the ones where I've added value, using my skills, my time, my talent, my treasures in a way to impact other people.
Yeah, and that rest day, right? We talk about all the time. Mm-hmm. That is fun and that's enjoyable because you did some creation, you did some work. So, and I think that's, if you listen to our stuff, that's kind of at the heart of why we feel this is such important work. Mm-hmm. is the worst thing you can be is somebody who ends, and is done. And I think there's this idea that I've shared with many exiting business owners or people coming into retirement that really, and I believe it, that arriving is the absolute opposite of thriving, right? So when you feel like you've arrived and you're done, you stop thriving. And I think that's key to a mindset, whether you're selling a business, whether you're retiring. Yeah. You cannot feel as if you've arrived.
Yeah, I've read this before, and we've mentioned it on the show, but I think there was one boy, I can't remember who it was, but they said creation is the highest form of existence. And again, to your point where, God is the ultimate creator, you've been made in his image. It's in your DNA to create. It's not an accident that you feel at your best, so to speak, when you create and add value. But I think a point to that is that, creation just doesn't happen by accident. Again, as we're kind of approaching the end of a year, if you're spending some time and reflecting on this past year, hopefully it was a great year. Hopefully, you're saying, man, that was an incredible year. Here are the good things that happened. Here are the things where I moved the needle in my life. You don't just wake up feeling that way. I think if you follow the world's ways, creation and the ways of the world just don't go hand in hand, do they?
No, not at all. I think, and none of this happens by accident. I think when the reason we feel so great when we've done things, when we've been fruitful, is because that is, I do feel the closest we can be to how God made us in his image. Yeah. And I'd encourage anybody listening, go back and read Genesis and read just how, when God sat back and said, it is good, I've done here. It wasn't done, but it was good. Yeah. And I think that's so important that people can realize and tie it into their own life. It's like, oh, that's why I feel so good after a hard day's work. That's why rest was so fulfilling. It was because there was work tied to it. And unfortunately, in our society today, with everything from retirement to people just feeling as if they've arrived and I'm done, to even government handouts. I think it is part of the problem and I think creates more problems than it does solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about kind of this first point here. You've alluded to it already just a little bit. If you read Genesis, right away in Genesis 1, it's very clear, God created and he looked back and he said that it was good. And you posed a really interesting question, as we were preparing for the show. You said, was he done? How would you answer that?
Well, I'd say notice what he said. What it said in God's word is, after God created, he sat back, he looked, he said, it is good. He didn't say it's done. He said it is good. And I think what's really cool about that is what I believe happened is now the creation story is handed off to us. Right. And anytime I'm working with people, whether it's stewarding their time, talent, or treasure, it comes back to, okay, God gave you this new role now. He handed the creation off to you. Okay. Now, whether that's you stewarding money, financial resources, or your time, which we know is the most valuable of all those, or certainly your talents, and that's what you're good at, right? Those things you are stewarding, and you are going to continue to create and make things better, and that's the only way to be fully fulfilled.
This reminds me of, we attended a fundraiser this fall, and the keynote speaker at the end of her message was doing the ask. And it's pretty common in the Christian world where you're asked to give funds and help support different organizations. And she said something that I thought was pretty interesting. She's like, and you probably heard something similar, but she's like, God doesn't need your money. Whether you choose to give or not, He's sovereign, and He's gonna do what He needs to do. But the beauty in you giving is you get to, and you use the word partner. You remember that? Explain that, because that's kind of what we're talking about here. God doesn't need us to fulfill His promises. What He's asking for us is to partner with Him. And I think this goes back to your point of like He's kind of handing the keys to us in ways.
Yeah, for sure. It's 100% doesn't need us to accomplish His works, but we get to partner with Him. Right. And it's like, I think I've shared this story before, but I'll share it again because it was so impactful to me. I was sitting by a young lady at a different fundraiser. Young lady meaning I think she was like in her mid 80s, and she gave me this analogy. She said, "Ben, we don't when we give money, and you can look at this whether it be financial, time, or time, talent, or treasure." She said, "Look at it like it's and right now a lot of people are baking Christmas cookies, Jared. Think of it as if your granddaughter is coming up to you. She was a grandmother." And your granddaughter's trying to help bake cookies. Grandma doesn't need her granddaughter to help her baking the Christmas cookies. She's going to do probably almost better without. Yeah. But what the granddaughter gets is to be partnering and to make and create these amazing Christmas cookies. And guess what? Grandma is just beaming with that. I think it's a great picture of, I think, what God looks at when we use both our time, talent, treasure. When we use that stuff to honor and glorify Him, it's not that He couldn't accomplish it without you. It's that you are being who you were created to be, and you are creating more of just whatever that is to make a difference in the world around you. And He sees it, and once again He's saying, good job. I mean, right? I mean, it is, I just get goosebumps when I talk about it, because I think it's such a great picture of what we hope people do in retirement.
Yeah, you always bring up the parable of the talents. That's like a staple story and analogy that you always bring up, where again you had two of the servants, they multiplied, they multiplied, and the one didn't, and the one that didn't was called a sloth, and was told to get away. Do you think it's like people's duty to create? How would you size that up in your head and your philosophy?
Yes, absolutely. Why God made you. If you're just here to be status quo and not make change, then yeah, I think you're falling short of, and you will get that answer, right? I'm convinced of that. I mean, every time I look at, yes, it's best for how we feel about ourselves, right. And that's important. I'm always at my best when I feel like I've accomplished something, but I think it's also important for when we meet our Maker someday. I don't want that answer. There's a key point to that parable I think many times goes missing, is that when the master gives the answer to the two that had multiplied, they got the exact same answer. One had turned 5 to 10, right, and doubled. The one that had 2 talents also doubled, but one was entrusted with less, but had done the same in the master's eyes, right. Got the same answer. The only one of the servants who got the slothful answer was the one that did nothing.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I think that should be that should give you peace, knowing that whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're, no matter what your vocation is, whether you have a lot or a little, the end goal isn't the fact of how much you get or multiply. It's the fact that you're just in the game, so to speak, trying to create.
Yeah, you have to be taking that step to say what and do an inventory. What do I have to offer the world? What do I have to offer my family? What do I have to offer the community around me? And then do something with that.
Yeah, absolutely. The next point we want to make is what's next. You mentioned it already. You said arriving is the enemy of thriving. Talk about that quote. Dig into that a little bit more, and then get into this book that you've been reading and telling me about.
Yeah, I don't even remember where I came up with that. Arriving is the enemy of thriving. It's not mine, but I love it because it's so true. And whether or not you're coming into retirement and you feel like, hey, that's been my goal my whole life is to get to retirement, and I feel like I've arrived. By the way, that should be a warning sign for you. If that was your goal, your work wasn't right for you, number one, but also you didn't arrive. You just made a change in your lifestyle, right? So arriving is the enemy of thriving. And some people, if that's selling a business, and that's where I'm looking at it today. You know, I've worked with two different, recently, business owners, and one of them has become a good friend, and most of the people I work with end up being that. And he gave me this book and recommended me a book that I hadn't read. And once again, I'm digging in. It's called Finish Big by Bo Burlingham. And he had a quote near the end of the book that I just love. He says, it's in the last chapter, one of the last chapters, says, your exit isn't over until you're fully engaged in whatever comes next. Think about that, Jared. And whether or not you're a business owner selling, and that's what this was kind of tied to, or you're just somebody who's retiring, either way, the concept is that you're not fully retired until you're engaged in whatever's next. Yeah. You're not fully done with this transition out of a business until you're fully into whatever's next. And I don't want people to hear like there always needs to be something because I need more money, because I need more whatever. But there has to be creation. And I think that's the key. We can't feel as if we've arrived.
No, I think that's a really interesting point because, and I like to hear that because I've always kind of been that way where it's like the next thing. I've also been accused of, well, you know, you can't be at a place in your heart where you're discontent, where you always have to have the next thing. Talk about that a little bit, Ben, because again, you preach contentment a lot on this show. Contentment is a huge part of the Repurpose platform, right? So that's a piece. So how does somebody, juggle being content, which the Bible is very clear on, but also having this mindset of creation and having kind of the next thing in mind?
Well, it isn't about what you have. It's about why you have it, Jared, first of all. I mean, I think that's key. Now, why do I want growth? Why do I want to continue to start with the next project? It isn't because I'm discontent. It's because I want to continue to grow. I want to continue to add to society. I want to make things that I'm doing. I want to fulfill why I was created. I was created to create. So if my goal is just to catch up with the person that has more than me, if my goal is because I want to, conquer the world and I'm putting that in front of my family, in front of my faith, then I think it's a problem. But if you're just creating because you love it, then I see far less of a problem there, Jared. I don't think I think sometimes contentment is misconstrued. It's like, well, a content person is just going to sit back and do nothing because they have everything they need.
Yeah, exactly.
That isn't it.
Yeah.
It really, it's misconstrued. When we look at contentment, it talks about that really clearly in 1 Timothy. It says in 1 Timothy 6:6, it says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it." Right? And that's true. We should be content. And I think we can't take it with us, but that doesn't mean that you can't be trying to achieve more and grow more. What are you going to do with that achievement? What are you going to do with that growth? I think there's always that disconnect with contentment and I'm not going to say laziness, but we should be trying to create and grow.
I think you said a key word there a couple of minutes ago, and I wanted to bring it up. But it's this difference between need and want. If you need the next thing to be happy, to me, you're in kind of the red flag area. If we're ever in a position where it's like, I have to have that, fill in the blank for me to be happy, you're in a very, very gray area. Entrepreneurs, people with a growth mindset, people who want to utilize their time, talent, treasure, they do it because they want to. I think wants lots of times get a bad rap. I want the thing. I want to grow. I want to build. I want to help. I want to do those things. And I think if just as me personally, I've kind of apologized for the things I want sometimes. I think God gives us very clear draws of our heart. So if you want to build and grow, take that as like a God wink saying, hey, let's roll with that. I think as we do it, it's because we want to, and I think you're almost paying homage to your Creator more so when we follow those things that we want. But I think, again, going back to the discontentment conversation, I think if you're in the need zone, there's a disconnect. If you're doing it because you want to and you're wired that way, I think that's a big difference between needing and wanting.
Yeah, and I think another cautionary thing that as you're talking, I'm thinking through. My wife listens to the show, Jared, and I know the first thing that she'd remind me is those projects, those creation things, the dreaming and all that stuff. Yes, it's who God made you, but when I move it in front of my family, when I move it in front of my relationship with God, when I start to kind of move that stuff behind, that's when, again, another red flag is it's the need want idea, and it's also at what cost. No. And then followed up with that is so that what, right? I think too many times when we're looking at what we're doing, we forget to add a so that to it. It's like why are you doing what you're doing? And continue to go down that question. It's like, well, I want to do this so that. I want to do that so that this and that can happen. Because I think it's important that we tie in any of the work we're doing into some reason. And if I'm trying to create more and have more so that I feel good about myself, and that's the end goal, that's a huge red flag.
So give an example of that. Walk us through the mental exercise there. What would be like a healthy way of using the so that statement? Use an example of a business owner, right? So it's like you have a business owner creates a viable, successful business, and now is moving on to the next thing. What's a healthy way to use that growth mindset and using kind of the so that statement?
So Jared, I'd say something like, so you're selling your business. Not only you get to the why of what they're doing it much quicker by saying so that, right? So I'd say so that and kind of pause. You'd usually get it, well, so I can spend more time with my family. It's a little bit,
less stressful,
blah, blah, blah. So that, and then it's, well, because I think they need more of me in their life. Okay. Number one is why, but so that, and you follow that up with, I can begin preparing them to get the wealth they're eventually going to get. So that what we have doesn't end up destroying their families, or it doesn't end up not being stewarded the way that, I believe it should be, right? And followed in with, how God's commanded me to steward this wealth.
Sure.
And you just continue down that drive, and eventually you get to the point, and I don't know this ever ends, right?
Yeah,
that discussion of so that. I think you continue to question
Yeah.
and ask, why am I doing what I'm doing? And it's just a great follow-up question.
I think this is such a cool conversation, because this is really like the antithesis of modern day retirement. Everything that we talked about on today's show, and probably 99% of our shows, Ben, is going against the template, so to speak, on what retirement should look like. Let's just spend like the last minute or two and just kind of juxtapose like retirement versus this idea of creating, of always being in a mindset of creating, not because it may make you more money, but because really at the end of the day, it's really what our lives are supposed to be all about.
Well, you can do the same scenario on the negative side. Is like you asked a retiree, so why are you retiring? And you try to get this so that and why, and it's if you get the answer, well, so that I can do more golf. Well, okay, so that what? Yeah. I mean, it ends pretty quickly.
Yeah, question
right?
2. Yeah.
So again, I think it's important that you can answer the question of why you're making that life decision, and if you're making it so that you can simply enjoy endless rest, I know from experience you will be unfulfilled. I know that there needs to be something much deeper than that. Society's going to say by everything that you look at is like the happiest people are the people that have nothing on their schedule. That's not true. That's true for about a day, maybe a week. But believe me, you will not be fulfilled if your so that is so that I can just rest all day.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.